So, for anybody who hasn't heard, Unity has just decided that they want to go completely insane and start scamming all of the developers like me who had the goal to want to use their game to make games. And you know what? I'm not even exaggerating there. I legitimately think that you could label what they are trying to do here as a scam. And I'm not even talking about the installation thing necessarily, but I guess I should start by explaining exactly what's going on for those who aren't aware. So essentially, as you can see by the headline of this particular article, Unity just announced that they're going to start charging developers in a new and strange way for using their engine. See, when you make a game, the cost of the game tends to get split between a number of different factors. Just as an example from this random post here, you have things like the developers usually get a part of it, but they also have to pay the costs of actually making the game. Then you have the publishers, which take part of the revenue, but they also usually are paying for marketing. Then, of course, you have the retailers or distributors like Steam or the Epic Games Store. You have discounts, marketing, like all kinds of different things. So normally the developers only get a fraction of the game, but one of those costs, in addition to all of that, is also sometimes the cost of using the game engine that you use to make the game. And that's why a lot of AAA studios tend to make their own in-house engines so that they can not only have tools that are more specifically suited towards the kinds of games that they make, but they also don't have to pay companies like Unity or Epic for using their engines, like the Unity engine or the Unreal engine. And for the sake of example for how a sane game engine might design their revenue split, the way the Unreal Engine works is after the game makes their first $1 million, after that point, any further money that the game makes, they have to give 5% of that as royalties to the Epic company for using the Unreal Engine. So you keep the first million 100%, then after that you simply give 5% to Epic. It's a pretty straightforward, simple, and relatively fair system. Like, I give Epic a lot of shit for the Epic Game Store, and they deserve it. But when it comes to the Unreal Engine, they're usually pretty good about this kind of stuff, and are actually pretty good for the devs. And this is also on a per project basis, meaning that if you make, say, $900,000 on one game, and then you make another game and make another $700,000, you don't pay Epic a dime because each of those games individually made less than $1 million. So overall, I think it's a pretty good system, and it's also really good for smaller indie devs that don't make a ton of money. So what is Unity's new policy? Well, now they're going to charge you for every time that a game is installed. Not for every sale you make, not for a percent cut of your total revenue, but for every time the game is installed. And the exact rate, of course, depends on whether or not you're already giving Unity money for one of their subscription services, or if you're using the personal, aka free version of Unity. Now, to be fair, they do still have a cutoff, just like Unreal does, but Unity's cutoff is only at $200,000 as opposed to Epic's $1 million cutoff. So their cutoff is literally at 1/5 of the price of Epic's. So already off to a bad start just looking at that. And secondly, their intent is that it's just the first install on a device and not any reinstalls on the same device. And there's a few other qualifiers that they're trying to backpedal on, since the story has naturally gotten a lot of backlash in the last couple of days. And, so they're trying to save face by claiming that, like, oh, fraudulent installs won't be an issue, because that is one of the first things that pretty much everybody immediately thought of. Like, now, people would have a direct way of just straight up taking money out of developers' pockets by just repeatedly reinstalling a game over and over. And this is particularly worrying for smaller indie games since it's a fixed rate cost. So the rate is the highest for the free version of Unity, and those games tend to be sold for the lowest amount. I mean, for example, just think about a game like Vampire Survivors, which, as far as I'm aware, is made in Unity. I mean, just looking at it, you can practically tell. The game is only sold for a few bucks a pop, and often it's sold for as little as a single dollar. But now, all that someone would have to do to make the developer lose money from their sale, at least under the initial version of the system that they presented, is just and reinstall the game like 5 times, and then all of a sudden, the developer has now lost money on their sale. And then the next logical step is that if you just write a simple script that automates this process, then when I'm sure somebody's probably already writing that in response to this news, you could easily automate this process and start costing the developers tons of money by just letting that program run in the background all day and night, constantly charging the developer 20 cents per instance until eventually one malicious user is costing them thousands of dollars and negating tons of other sales for their games. So obviously Unity doesn't want to outright say that they'll be profiting off of things like that, so they claim that they'll be able to just, detect those cases and not charge for them. But I mean, like, I trust Unity about as far as I can throw them, but even if we focus entirely on just, legitimate, non-fraudulent installs, it's still an incredibly problematic system. I mean, for one, we still have no idea what actually counts as a real install on a new device, according to Unity, and that's entirely up to Unity to decide. And keep in mind that PC gamers tend to update their rigs fairly regularly. So if, say, you replace your hard drive, then of course you gotta reinstall all your software, but say you replace your graphics card or something like that, you technically didn't have to touch your software, but does that computer now count as a new device because it has different hardware in it? I could very easily see Unity deciding to just count that towards them getting another charge. Not to mention, there's the issue that you might be using multiple devices that you could be accessing your account from, and they explicitly state that they'll be treating different devices as different installs. And if that is the case, then that's just outright insane if you just think about the logistics of it. I mean, just say that you have a laptop or a Steam Deck in addition to your PC. That's another couple of installs right there. Or maybe you're on a family sharing plan. There's several more installs per unit sold. I mean, just from that alone, a small indie game being sold for only a few bucks is really getting punished here because it's a fixed rate cost per install. So games that are sold for less money or go on sale often are directly disincentivized from doing that because Unity is effectively taking a much larger cut of the pie when that happens. And I mean, when you take into account things like publisher fees, distributor fees, marketing, the cost of doing business and whatnot, then that 20-cent charge being multiplied by every device people play their game on, it's entirely possible for games that are only sold for a couple bucks to lose money on a per sale basis, even without any malicious actors at play. And the fact that it's even possible at all in an edge case should show you how insanely stupid and short-sighted this monetization scheme is. Like, they now have to directly try and address this problem that they themselves created. If they simply went for a more straightforward percentage cut of revenue like Epic does, then this could have all been avoided, and they could have even tried to play the good guys by going like, oh, Epic charges 5%, well, we'll charge 4%, and then just call it a day. And I doubt anybody would have even batted an eye. Like, I don't think it would have even been news if they had done that. But the real kicker is, and I think what the real motivation for why they decided to go with this batshit insane scheme is the mobile market. For one, just think about how mobile games work. Unity is already really popular on the mobile scene because it's just really good for making mobile apps. I mean, I myself have worked on Unity-based mobile apps personally, but it's also probably the most volatile platform in terms of data. A lot of mobile operating systems these days automatically uninstall and reinstall applications just in the background in order to save data. So a user could potentially be unwittingly causing extra charges to a developer without even realizing it. And on top of that, tons of people upgrade their phones every couple of years. So, best case scenario, you're still getting extra charges every time somebody does that. And of course, there's the fact that most mobile games are free to play and they make money off of microtransactions. And if you're unaware, usually the amount of people that actually spend any money on a free to play game is usually around the 5 to 20% mark. Like, the vast majority of players never actually buy anything. And as a result, that means that this system will have the biggest impact on these kinds of free to play titles, mobile or otherwise, if we're being honest. So, not only is this like essentially the effect is that for every like 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 installs, they're only going to be making money off of one of them. And then for the other 19 installs, they're still going to have to be paying Unity for each of those installations. And that's assuming each user only installs it a single time. Whereas if they upgrade their phone or like I said, stuff like that, then each of those 20 installs could potentially be installing it multiple times. So realistically, it could be closer to like 1 in 40 or 1 in 60 installs that they're actually making any money off of. And suddenly that 20-cent charge really starts to add up. I mean, I've already found posts from other devs that people have made about how their mobile games will actually owe Unity over 100% of their total gross revenue due to how this payment structure works. And this example in particular is before even factoring in other costs like having to pay their employees. I imagine this could easily ruin countless other games with similar formats after you take into account things like taxes, employee wages, distributor and publisher fees, and so on. Now all of a sudden Unity's asking for anywhere from 50 to over 100% of these people's revenue. And if you need even more evidence that the mobile market is what they're really after, Unity has actually specifically stated, not very loudly, but a few places have reported on it, that they will just quietly waive these absurdly high controversial fees if developers switch to its ad service. So effectively what they're doing is they're holding all of these developers' entire wages hostage if they just switch to their ad service. Because Unity's the one that has all the power here. So if they want to try and make a new deal to not have to pay Unity this much money, Unity could just say no and just force them to pay more than 100% than what they're making and put these companies out of business. So they're literally grabbing them by the balls and being like, hey, use our ad service or we'll literally shut you down. So this entire thing could literally just be about trying to destroy one of their main competitors in this sort of mobile ad format, landscape. So yeah, I think that it's pretty clear that given this unique deal that is pretty much just for mobile games, that this is their real intent. They just also happen to fuck it up for everybody else as well in the process of doing this. But oh man, we're still diving deep into this because it gets so much better. So another thing I managed to dig up while following this story for the last few days was this leak on the Unity forums from an alleged Unity employee. Now, obviously, I should say that this isn't fully confirmed. It's just a new account and this is their only post because presumably if they're a real employee, then they want to keep their identity secret. But obviously it could just be an elaborate troll, so take what I'm going to say based off of this post with a grain of salt. But in my opinion, the content of this message seems pretty believable and reasonable. So, for one, this of course has been in the works behind closed doors for weeks, at the very least, and they've already been raising these concerns to the higher-ups that are trying to push this through for weeks now. So these aren't new issues, and yet they seemingly announced this without addressing any of these concerns whatsoever. And this lines up with some other reports that have been coming out from other Unity employees that have just quit in response to this new policy, and they're already taking to sites like Twitter and whatnot to talk about how bullshit this is. So honestly, this lines up with what we've seen from other sources. But the really juicy part of this, that you might not see at first if you're just skimming through this post, is this one little line right here, which is that Unity hasn't actually completely figured out how they're going to count the installs yet. Now, he tries to say that whatever the solution is, that it'll probably undercount them or whatever, but the point is that literally everything Unity is currently trying to claim is complete bullshit. Like, they've been releasing these kinds of posts talking about how, oh, we're not going to charge a fee for reinstalls, and we're not, like, our system won't detect, or they'll know when a fraudulent install takes place, and so we won't charge developers for that, and charities are also exempt, so don't worry, we'll make sure that if you're selling your bundle or selling your game in like a charity bundle, that you won't have to pay fees on that. But all of these claims are complete bullshit because they haven't actually made the software yet to count the installs. All of these claims are just them saying what they hope that they'll be able to detect without any actual proof or evidence that it will. And you can bet your ass that when this software comes out, it'll almost certainly be buggy as hell, register a lot of fraudulent installs as legitimate, and it'll at the very least be exploited the second it comes out by malicious actors that want to purposefully try and make it seem like they're, reinstalling the game over and over to punish whatever developer they don't like. It's frankly astonishing that they even managed to have the balls to announce such an insane pricing scheme, while also not even having the actual means of tracking said pricing scheme. And then even when they do develop it, it's almost certainly going to be some proprietary nonsense that nobody is allowed to see, which means that we're just going to have to take Unity's word on it that you owe them whatever amount of money that they say you do, and thanks to how bad the scheme is, it could fluctuate rapidly and be completely unpredictable, so it's impossible to account for it properly or predict what the cost will actually be when you're managing your business. Even if it won't cause the company to go into the red from the cost, the fact that you have to factor in this insanely variable and unpredictable cost as part of your finances, like that on its own will make a ton of companies not want to work with Unity anymore. But honestly, that's not even the end of it. See, like I said at the beginning, I think that this whole thing is a scam, and it's not actually because of the install thing, not directly at least. Yeah, tracking how much money you owe Unity by the number of installs is a dumb, terrible, and bad system, and they definitely need to not do that, but even if they do announce that they're getting rid of the install system for a more traditional revenue split like Unreal does, that won't be enough to make this problem go away. You see, if you do some digging around this news story, Unity has been up to some way more shady shit than many people are commenting on. And I'm not even necessarily talking about the allegations about insider trading that have been getting thrown around for the last few days. No, I'm talking about the fact that they took down their GitHub that their terms of service was stored on. Now, the reason why they stored their terms of service on a GitHub repo, which is no longer accessible, is because that way developers could easily just use the repo to immediately get alerted and be able to track any changes that they make to the GitHub, or rather to their terms of service on the GitHub at any time very easily. And lo and behold, not long after they made it harder to know that they changed their terms, and it wasn't exactly for the better. See, here's a post by someone smarter than me going over the actual differences between the old and the new terms of service. So, like I said, sometime after July of 2022 is when they actually got rid of the GitHub link so that it's harder to track the terms. But of course, lots of people have cataloged these old terms, and so it's pretty easy to compare the new and the old one. Now, if we look at this key clause in the old terms of service, there's a really nice detail here talking about how basically updated terms will not apply to the use of current year versions of Unity until you update to a later version. Essentially, they can change their terms at any time, but it only applies to the latest version of Unity for when they make that term change. So if you make a game for, like I said, games take a long time to develop, so if you make a game in like 2016 and it takes you 4 years to develop it, then you can keep using the 2016 terms of service no matter if they change it so that the 2021 is dumb and stupid. Except now, if you actually look at the new terms of service, this clause is completely gone. And that's very suspicious, isn't it? And I think you can tell what this means just from putting two and two together. So now, just because they said so in their new terms, despite the previous version of the terms saying that you could just keep using them, now you have no choice but to use their latest terms of service no matter what. Whether your game is about to come out, whether it only just started development today, or if it came out 10 years ago. They're all under the new terms, and thus all subject to the new install-based fee. But better yet, they still have the right to change the terms on a whim if they so choose. So what that means is that effectively, they could just change the rules on a whim to whatever they want them to be, and everybody is forced to abide by them. And if you don't believe me, just think about the fact that Unity's system uses a flat rate per install. Like, due to things like inflation existing, the fixed rate would effectively go down in value over time, and Unity would make less and less money with each subsequent year. So, of course they're going to include a clause that lets them update this pricing system so that they can keep up to date with things like inflation, so that they keep making more money. But that's honestly the best case scenario, because we're in a situation where Unity holds all of the power, and like I said, they can change the rules at any time they want, just on a whim. And that's why I call this new system a straight up scam. Like, let me paint you a scenario, for example. Imagine, if you will, that you were being hired for a new job, and when you sign your contract, you realize there's a clause in the contract that says that your boss can just rewrite the entire contract at any time and doesn't need your approval or signature to do so, but it still applies to you no matter what. So in effect, your boss can just decide that he doesn't have to pay you anymore, or that in fact you owe money to him, or that your working hours are now 16 hours a day with no breaks. If you encountered that in real life, people would call it what it is, a goddamn scam. But what's the point of a contract if one of the parties can just change all the terms on a whim and force the other party to abide by them? Like, that is completely farcical, isn't it? And yet, that is literally what Unity is currently doing and just expecting people to just go along with. The devs of Rust, I think, put it best in their latest blog post. And I'm not just talking about the title of their blog, but overall, just their whole stance on this issue. Basically, they talk about how the issue has nothing to really do with the cost. Like they say, if everything worked out, if the tracking was flawless, and it was all just a fixed rate per sale, it wouldn't be that big a deal. It would cost what it costs, and that's what it costs. But that is not why people are really furious. The problem is the broken trust from them being willing and able to enact this new policy in the way that they did. Nobody would have thought that Unity had the right to suddenly just enact this broken and insanely stupid pricing scheme like this. The comparison they use is likening Adobe charging all of their users per image view. Like, it would be a frankly absurd system. But now that Unity has shown that they're willing to implement such a terrible and short-sighted system and force everybody to use it, who's to say that they won't make it worse in the future? Yeah, sure, yeah, today it's 20 cents per install, but tomorrow it could be $20 per install, and we'd be able to do nothing to stop them. Or maybe they change it from charging on a per install basis to now make it charging for every time a user boots up the game. Or maybe they'll go for an hourly rate, and now you have to pay Unity for every hour that somebody spends playing your game. Sure, these hypotheticals sound just frankly patently absurd, but so does charging someone based on the number of installs completely independently from their actual revenue. Like, basically, if Unity wants literally anyone to ever use their game engine again, they need to fix their terms. They need to re-add the clause that lets you continue using an older terms of service based on the current version of Unity that you're using, but then also include a new clause that makes it impossible to take away that right no matter what bullshit they try to implement in the future. And then people can just keep using older versions of Unity and call it a day. So, yeah, I mean, that's basically the long and short of it. Like, there's not much more I think I can really say about the whole thing is just incredibly moronic. But honestly, despite how, rage-inducing and pissed off I am about this and how just absurdly stupid this whole thing is, I have to say I'm kind of optimistic. I know it's weird to say, but hear me out for a second. I legitimately do not think that this is going to stick, and I doubt that we'll make it to January 1st with this policy actually in place, and not just because they haven't even made the software to track the installs yet. Like, not only is it an incredibly stupid policy, but Unity has also managed to single-handedly piss off quite possibly the most companies that anyone has ever pissed off with a single announcement. I mean, for example, Microsoft just bought Blizzard for $70 billion, and now one of their biggest cash cows, Hearthstone, is going to be affected by this policy. And I'm sure as hell that when Unity casually stated that it would be on the distributors to pay, for things like subscriptions, so that, oh, don't worry about releasing your game on Game Pass, Microsoft will foot the bill for that. Yeah, I'm sure Microsoft is super happy about that deal that is being forced upon them. I mean, hell, Game Pass might even be worse off than mobile games for how this policy works. So, and I'm willing to bet that Microsoft is going to be real pissed about Unity trying to steal their Game Pass dollars. And I mean, Nintendo is going to be pissed off because Pokemon Go and Fire Emblem and a few others are all made in Unity, and I don't need to tell you how powerful Nintendo's lawyers can be when they get mad. And I mean, hell, even Disney is going to get in on this action. They just released a very successful mobile game not too long ago with Marvel Snap, and now Unity is threatening to basically take all of their money from that. Naturally, none of these corporations, of course, have spoken out, and because as of the time of this recording, but that's because they likely have massive PR teams that need to hold a bunch of meetings and whatnot before they say anything official. Hence why it's mostly indie devs that have been speaking out about this policy for the most part as of now. But if there is one thing that I think you can trust a corporation to do, it's to protect their bottom line. So I have a funny feeling that Unity is about to receive a bunch of very strongly worded letters about their new policies in the coming months, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's some serious litigation about this in the future. I mean, hell, Unity is apparently only worth less than a quarter of what Microsoft paid for Blizzard, so I wouldn't be shocked if Microsoft just decided to say fuck it and buy up Unity in its entirety so they could just stop this from happening themselves and implement a more sane policy going forwards. But yeah, that's all I have to say on this for now. I mean, I don't want to talk about this anymore. I'm gonna go back to making videos about fun stuff. Unity can go fuck itself.